Hi there, I'm Kate McClellan, and I've been a professional wedding planner for over 20 years now. I started Planning Collective when I noticed that though most couples are super excited about getting engaged, they quickly feel overwhelmed and intimidated by the actual process of planning their weddings. If left unchecked, this can lead to massive burnout and the urge to scrap all your plans and just elope. While this is totally normal, you don't have to sacrifice your sanity for your dream wedding. In the Wedding Planning Collective podcast, I'm going to share the processes, tips, and tools that all engaged couples like you need to feel confident, supported, and excited about your wedding plans again. Let's get started. Hey there, before we get to the episode, I have a quick question for you. Have you been unsuccessfully trying to shake that feeling that you're forgetting something when it comes to your wedding? You've got the Knot app and you've downloaded countless other planning checklists, but you just can't get rid of that sneaking suspicion that there's something you don't know yet. It's a very common feeling when it comes to wedding planning. So much so that I decided to put together a free resource to help get rid of what I call FOWO, the fear of wedding oversight. Yes, it does include that 12-month task checklist, but that's just the start. In addition to the ultimate wedding planning checklist, my new Don't Forget list also includes a wedding vendor checklist, your shopping list, a packing list for the wedding weekend, and a complete wedding item setup list to make sure that you are truly not forgetting anything when it comes to your wedding. And you heard me right, this list is free for you to grab right now. Just head over to planningcollective.com/forgetting and it's all yours. That's planningcollective.com/FORGETTING and let's get rid of that FOWO together. All right, let's get on to the episode. Hey guys, Kate here. Welcome back to another episode of the Wedding Planning Collective podcast. Today's episode, we're going to chat about one of the first major decisions that couples will need to make about their wedding, and that is deciding on the venue. However, I, of course, want to give my common disclaimer to those that are just finding this podcast here at this episode. Before you start making any official decisions regarding your wedding, you'll want to start with making sure you have a solid foundation to your wedding planning. If you haven't listened to the Wedding Planning Blueprint series that I put out, make sure that you start there. In that series, I cover the crucial steps that you need to take before you book your venue. I know it's so tempting to skip through those steps and get to the fun stuff like talking about venues, but if you spend just a few minutes, you can save a ton of time and money. So it is definitely worth it. You can find the series on YouTube or whatever platform you're listening to the podcast on. It's episodes 112 through 116, or you can sign up over at planningcollective.com/blueprint. And that's where you're going to get access to all of the workbooks and other resources that I mentioned throughout the series. Okay, now let's move on to one of the most exciting and overwhelming topics about wedding planning, and that is finding your venue. Now, I see this happen all the time. A couple gets engaged, they're beyond excited, and they immediately start booking venue tours for the places that you've already been like stalking on Instagram or driving by thinking like, ooh, I really want to check that place out. And I totally get it. Finding the perfect venue makes everything feel real. It's when you can finally start picturing how things are going to happen. And of course, it's how you actually lock in a date. But here's the problem that I see. Couples jump into venue shopping too soon, and that leads them to making some expensive mistakes that lead to budget stress, logistical nightmares, or even heartbreak of falling in love with the venue that just isn't going to work with your budget or other priorities. So before you start scheduling tours, let's slow things down just a little bit. I promise I'm not talking about like delaying for a long time, but let's talk about some things that you really need to do before you book your venue. Step one, this is going to be a shocker, know your priorities. Before you start reaching out to venues, you need to be crystal clear on what actually matters to you. Again, I know this step is tempting to skip. You already talked about priorities in the Blueprint series. You've probably had quick conversations about the budget, the guest list, the location. But now we want to focus specifically on the venue when we're talking about priorities, or you'll end up making choices that really don't align with your vision, or worse, the budget. So let's dig into some venue specific things that you'll want to consider when it comes to your priorities. To get started, here are some key questions that you will want to consider. Do you want an indoor or outdoor ceremony and reception? Do you want both the ceremony and reception at the same location? Is it important to have hotels, transportation, or other attractions nearby, especially if you have a lot of family that's going to be traveling? Do you prefer a fully inclusive venue that handles like the catering, bar service, and all of that? Or do you prefer to have the flexibility to bring in all of your own vendors? Are there specific decor restrictions that you need to be aware of? Like some venues don't allow open flames, hanging decor, or outside furniture rentals. Are you and your family willing and able to help with setup and teardown? Do you need flexibility with your guest list? Or are you okay with a hard guest count limit? And the most important question of all, what is your overall budget for the wedding? A lot of couples make the mistake of falling in love with the venue first, and then they build their budget around the venue. And that's how you end up completely overspending on your reception, leaving little room for other details that might matter to you. So instead, make sure that you're looking at venues that actually fit your budget from the start, not venues that require you to stretch your finances beyond what you're comfortable with. Step two, understand the true cost of what goes into a wedding venue. When it comes to wedding budgets, the venue and reception cost is typically going to be 40 to 50% of the overall budget. But here's where things can get tricky. Your venue cost isn't just the rental fee and or the food and beverage minimum. In fact, for every venue, it's going to be a little bit different. And what goes into that 40 to 50% can be really complicated. In fact, I have a whole lesson in the wedding planning blueprint course that's dedicated to figuring that out. The course is included in the Planning Collective membership. So if you're interested in getting more information, you can head on over to planningcollective.com/membership. Generally speaking, though, that 40% should include the venue rental fee, the catering and bar service. So whether that is included with the venue or something you need to bring in separately, any rentals like tables, chairs, dishware, linens, etc. Any extra fees for staffing that you may need, setup help, or other required vendors. And of course, tent rentals, lighting, or additional decor if needed. If you're considering a non-traditional venue, like a backyard wedding or a unique space that we'll talk about in just a bit, you need to factor in the cost of all of those details to make sure that it fits within that 40 to 50%. It adds up so quickly. And step three, choosing the right style of venue. So now that you know your priorities and budget, let's talk about the three main categories of venues that I see out there: the traditional banquet hall or hotel venue, a backyard or private residence, or a unique venue like a barn, museum, or other space that you bring a lot of the details in. Let's break down the pros and cons for each. Starting with the traditional banquet hall or hotel venue. The pros for a traditional venue would be that most everything is going to be included in regards to that 40 to 50% of what you have to think of. You will typically have food, bar, staffing, solid options for tables, chairs, linens. Most traditional venues are going to have all of that included. So you'll have one vendor for the majority of what's going to make up that reception or venue fee. Now, of course, you'll have outside vendors that you'll need to work with, but typically speaking, everything in that venue cost is going to come from one vendor. It can make things a lot easier. Hotels, of course, offer an on-site guest accommodation, which is super convenient for a lot of couples. And many venues also have space for a rehearsal dinner or a brunch if you want to have it the next day, which keeps things really simple all in one place. The cons for a traditional venue would be that you're often limited to the bar and menu options that they have, which isn't an issue for a lot of couples, but it may be for some. Some hotels and banquet halls will have multiple events going on at the same time, so be sure to ask how they manage that. Some hotel and banquet venues are gorgeous as is, but a lot of times they need a little bit more to make it feel personal. The second type of wedding, a backyard or private residence wedding. Now, these are often thought of in the beginning stages of planning as like the budget friendly option, but they come with a lot of extra work. So the pros would be that you have ultimate flexibility. You get to choose your vendors from rentals to overall style. You don't have set packages or minimum spending requirements, and it will feel incredibly personal and unique. The cons are you're essentially building a venue from scratch. That means you're renting everything: tent, tables, chairs, restrooms, lighting, all of it. You need to bring all of it in. You'll need to coordinate with multiple vendors and figure out the logistics like power, parking, are there noise restrictions, a whole bunch of other logistics that you wouldn't have to worry about at a traditional venue. It's often more work for your family. Unless you hire a full service wedding planner, you're essentially acting as the venue coordinator. And the costs add up pretty quickly. I tend to see that a backyard wedding is going to cost about the same as a traditional venue once you add in the things that make it feel like a wedding. Now, can you get away with a very casual, low cost backyard wedding? Absolutely. But once you add in the components that are going to make it feel more formal, like a wedding, then it's going to be a little bit more comparable to what a banquet hall or a venue would be. Okay, the final category I call unique venues, and these are going to be the spaces like barns, farmers markets, maybe a museum, the places that you rent that either aren't traditional banquet halls, so weddings or events aren't like their main line of business, but they can offer like a shell of a space for you guys to bring things in. These venues generally offer a lot more character and flexibility than a banquet hall, but they don't require like the full DIY effort of a backyard wedding, of course, depending on the venue. Some of the pros are that you still get the structure of the venue. So you likely won't need a tent or the large rental items. Most will allow you to bring in your own caterer, bar service, which can really save a lot of money. And they're a great option for couples that want something not traditional, but still functional. Again, not like you're starting from scratch in a backyard. The cons of unique venues are that often unique venues aren't full time event spaces. Now, this can be a pro, of course, but it also means that the staff may not have extensive wedding planning experience and they may not have a team that's really dedicated to the event side of things. Depending on the venue, you may need to wait a little bit longer for responses or take a lot more of the planning on your shoulders. So make sure you ask if they have somebody that helps walk you through the process, or if you're going to find yourself in a similar position to those planning a backyard or private residence wedding. You'll likely still need to coordinate multiple vendors and rentals. And if the venue rental fee is high, you may end up spending just as much or even more than a traditional banquet hall. Before we wrap up, if you are considering a backyard or non traditional venue, make sure that you grab the free backyard wedding guide. It walks you through the logistics of rentals and checklists, budgeting tips, and all the checklists. You can get that over at planningcollective.com/free guides. Now, once you've decided the type of venue that you want, it's time to start scheduling some tours. I put together a list of questions that you should ask while you're touring the venues. You can grab that over at planningcollective.com/vendor questions. Now, I would love to hear from you. What type of venue did you book or are you looking to book for your wedding? Head over to the Wedding Planning Collective Facebook group and let me know. And if you have a quick second, I would love it if you could subscribe and give me a quick review. It helps more couples find these planning tips, and it absolutely makes my day. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.